Good evening. Welcome to the 6:30. Gosh, I don't even know what today is. Sorry. September 3rd City Council meeting. I'm so sorry. At this time, we will stand for a pledge and prayer by Councilman Lawrence. I almost said Lawson. I'm not with it today. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father God, we humbly come before you and your throne, Father, asking that you give this council wisdom and knowledge, Father, to guide and direct in the ways that we should go, Father. Lord, we ask that you just bless this council and all of the emergency response people, Father, and everyone that works for this city, Father. Lord, let them be a blessing to you and to this community. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. At this time, we'll have questions and comments from any citizens that would like to speak. Hi,
Yes,
Judy.
I'm Judy Flanders, and I'm here to let the council know about a couple of events coming up in September, which are taking part in part because you help us with the funding through the hotel and motel tax money. The first one is Monday, September 16th at 7 p.m. at the Borger High School Auditorium, and the performers are going to be a group called Legacy, Motown, and More. And it's 3 singers, and they're bringing their own music with them, and I expect a really fantastic concert from them. They have been appearing on Broadway in a show prior to going on tour. So I have some brochures with me tonight. You can always get in touch with me, or you can look at our website, which is tricityconcerts.org, or look at our Facebook page. So that's one thing. And then on the 21st of September, which is a Saturday, the Friends of the Hutchinson County Museum are having their annual Cowboy Poetry and Music event, and that will be at the new Conference Center, which is a blessing to us because we had outgrown 2 different places. We had almost 300 people last year at this event. You do need a ticket just so we can plan for the meal, and you can get that by calling the museum. And we're going to have 4 performers this year. And then a new item that kind of ties into this is the Chamber is going to have their annual craft bazaar, and we've added another item to that. It's called Cowboy Trade Days. And so from 9 to 5 in the Dome will be this craft show and trade show. And so we're hoping people come out and buy some things there and then come on in and hear our program. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much, Judy. And I see no others, so we'll move on to the consent agenda items 5 through 8. If there's any questions or comments on any of them, and if not, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve consent items 5 through 8.
Second.
And all in favor? And they pass. Moving on to item 9, conduct a public hearing and then consider and take appropriate action to approve on final reading ordinance O-005-24, adopting a combined tax rate of 0.656645 cents per $100 valuation for fiscal year 2025. Mr. Spratlin.
So I'm not going to say that too much. We did have a presentation last budget, and we'll recap that just a little bit when we do the operating budget presentation. But this is just the second reading. This is the no new revenue tax rate, so this is not a tax increase. And on top of that, we did, just reminding, we'll talk about that, we did do the 20% homestead exemption, so really property taxes for most people that live here should be going down.
Yes. And then at this point, we'll open a public hearing. If anyone has anything, anybody on council? And if not, then we'll close the public hearing, and we will, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve on final reading ordinance O-005-24, adopting a combined tax rate of 0.656645 per $100 valuation for fiscal year 2025.
Second.
And all in favor, and we'll do a show of hands. And it passes. And then item 10, receive a presentation on the fiscal year 2025 proposed operating budget, conduct a public hearing, and then consider and take appropriate action to approve on final reading ordinance O-006-24, adopting the fiscal year 2025 operating budget. Mr. Spradlin.
So it's finally getting toward the end of all of this work that we've all been putting in for the last couple of years, or last couple of months. We do it every year.
Feels like you're-
Like here, I'm sure.
So apparently, apparently the mayor's not the only one struggling after coming back from a holiday weekend. But we do want to kind of go through our operating budget that was introduced last week and give a little better glimpse of what all this is including. I do want to remind everybody that we do have all of this online at the borgertx.gov. If you click on financial transparency, there's a whole bunch of information on there. This year, I kind of wanted to talk just a little bit and show how this budget looks online, because we do develop our budget for a web view now. So if you scroll down on that financial transparency page, you can see, like, click here to view our online version of the proposed budget. And it'll take you to a whole website dedicated to the budget with all the information that you can click on. And once it loads up here in a minute, we'll get a view on that. It's got a lot more information on the online version than what we provide in the printed version. Of course, the printed version, we are trying to kind of keep it, from being 12,000 pages. But all the charts and all the fund summaries in the online version, you can go and learn more about each property tax, each revenue source. You can see the charts and how we've performed over that. When you get to fund summaries, you can look at all the differences, like here's the general fund and how we've performed over the last couple of years. You've got all the detailed charts, which sometimes expand more than the printed charts. And then you have a lot more graphics that you can cycle through. So you can see them in bar chart or pie chart. When you get to the departments, you can explore every individual department and kind of do the same thing. You've got a lot more breakdown in the information and the charts, to where in the budget, we might just have one chart or one graphic. Online, we have multiple. And the charts have all of the details, line items, to where in the print version, we limit that just a little bit to save some paper. So I just want to put that out there, that all this is out there. It is really easy and really good to see, and there's a ton of information out there on that. So be sure, if you have any questions, to explore that borgertx.gov. And as the council knows, there's a ton of information out there as our expenditures and our budget reports and our financials, so everything's on that page. So I would encourage everybody to check the website for more. Like I said, a recap of our certified property values. So over the last several years, you can see that the property values have continued to increase. We did see a little bit of a decrease this year because the council approved that 20% homestead tax exemption. That removed a little more than $60 million from the appraised rolls. So if you add that $60 million to that 476, we would have been at 530, so we would have increased again last year. Now, the certified values are only part of the property tax equation, so the other part is what is that rate. And so while the appraised values have gone up, you can see that the city's rate has steadily decreased. This year, we adopted the no new revenue rate, which is the rate that generates the same amount of tax revenue as the previous year. The 3 years prior, we adopted a rate below that. So in the last 4 years, other than the homestead exemption increase that the state passed on your school property, the city of Borger is the only taxing entity on your property tax bill that has adopted a rate that equated a property tax decrease. So this budget was developed with that goal in mind, so there is no new property tax revenue in this budget or funding any of our projects this year. Again, so the current rate was 0.647. The no new revenue rate was 0.65645, voter approval rate 0.89. We did approve that no new revenue rate. So again, just to kind of review what we talked about last week, is the impact on the tax rate went up 1.4%. The average appraised value went up 8%. So the average tax without a homestead went up 10%. But our total tax levy went up went down 0.5 because this is a rate generating less revenue. But if you have a homestead, if you live in the community, your tax rate went up 1.4%, but your value went down 19.4%, so your average tax went down 8%. So the average homeowner is paying about $50 less this year than they did last year with a homestead. So we did also add a little over $3 million to the property tax roll for new property. That's additions or new construction in the community. So there again, when you look at the amount of revenue we've collected over time with the property tax rate, you can see that that revenue has slowly decreased over the last 6 years as we've reduced that rate and focused revenue from other sources instead of burdening that on the property owners. So we have been very mindful at the council's direction of the property tax rate and how we're structuring our budget to fund those. I did want to again point out this, our foregone revenue. So the council can adopt a rate up to the voter approval rate without having an election. So this year, if the council had chosen to generate or to adopt the voter, a rate right under the voter approval rate, it would have generated an additional $784,000. So this year, this budget and the council took action to allow $784,000 to remain with our property owners. Last year, that amount was 1.1 million. The year before that was about $900,000. In 2021, it was about $500,000. That number goes up over time because we do get to bank 3% in that rolling average. So really, what we look at that, and based on council's feedback, that amount of foregone revenue is our emergency money. The oh crap, something changed drastically. And so by banking that, we give ourselves a little bit of flexibility in case something bad happened that we had to respond to. But we've been grateful that we have not had to do that, and we've been able to continue to pass those savings along to our taxpayers. So this year's budget, our two main funds, of course, are the general fund, which is all your public safety and streets, public works. Revenue is increasing 4.4%. That's in light of the tax rates decreasing. So our tax revenue, both in property tax and sales tax revenue, is going to decrease just a little bit from our revenue last year. The biggest increases are industrial contracts that were renegotiated last year, so they're continuing to increase yearly for the 7 years of that. Our fines and forfeitures are going up. Some of that's related to the contractors and stuff in town. This is still not a lot. I will remind everybody that going up is going up from $100,000 to $124,000, so it's not necessarily a lot of money, considering that the municipal court costs us $200,000 to operate, the police department costs us over $4 million to operate, and that out of the $142 base fine, the state of Texas gets $109 of that. So we're collecting $124,000 of that, and we're going to pay back the state of Texas about $100,000 of that. So what the city actually keeps is $24,000, and we still have all that cost. But that is increasing a little bit. Also, we have an increase in our SRO reimbursement because the school added that 6 SRO, so there is revenue to offset that. We have a little bit of budgeted increase in our EMS revenue with some things that Jeff's working on and Terry have been working on. We think is going to generate just a little bit of revenue, so I've kind of tried to cushion that in there. We also have some significant increase in the contract fire services. Again, we'll talk about that in personnel services later, but we're taking that revenue from $350,000 to $550,000 next year, so that's a lot of where your revenue is coming. So when the general fund revenue is increasing, it's not coming from your taxes. It's coming mainly from service charges, which are directly charged to people that are benefiting from that service or the school district reimbursement. On the water sewer side, we're seeing a decrease in revenue of about 1.2%. So we've seen sewer charges decrease in the last couple of years. They had been way under budgeted, so we're trying to kind of figure that out. So we are going down just a little bit. We are planning on a 4.2% increase in water sales. Water and sewer tend to be the most volatile of all of our revenue sources just because they have seasonal impacts. Right now, everybody's watering pretty good because it's been hot and we haven't had much rain. But last year, we had all that rain way early on, so water was down. Industrial water sales tend to be about flat. We're a little under this year because both Phillips and Nutrient had turnarounds, and so they don't use as much water when they go through turnaround, but overall still strong. When we talk about what's impacting some of that, the revenue are the fees. There are very minimal fee changes in this budget. Solid waste is moving from $27.50 a month to $28. That's a 50-cent increase. Again, we do that every year as our contract with Pampa for the solid waste disposal increases each year. So their tipping fees are also increasing for that. Sewer minimum is moving from $18.75 to $21. That's in line with our rate study that was conducted 2 years ago. If you remember last year, we did a water consumption reduction to help offset some of that cost. So this year, there's no change in water rates, and the only change is the sewer base minimum. So the consumption rate is staying the same, and your water rates are staying the same. So for those on a 3/4 meter, if you recall last year, we did almost a $3 per month decrease in the fixed monthly rate, and then a 15-cent per 1,000 gallon decrease in the consumption rate. So they got those 3/4 inch meters kind of had a pretty good savings last year, and we're starting to claw back just a little bit because our sewer side was under-collected from our water side. A lot of what we're planning in the CIP plan for utilities is on the sewer side, where we're replacing collapsed sewer lines, the screw pump at the solid waste, now you've got me calling it solid waste. At the wastewater treatment plant is on the sewer side, so we're trying to shift some of the revenue from the water to the sewer side to make sure that we're in line. So if you look at the impact on your monthly bill for that, so for a 3/4 inch meter that for someone using 1,000 gallons or less, it's going up by about $1.75, which is a 2.5% increase. On the 3,000 gallon monthly consumption, which is your average, more of your average, you'll see that it's going up about about $2.40, and then the chart there changes as you change water usage or meter size. If you recall, 2 years ago, we did go to a tiered base rate based on your meter size. The bigger your meter, the more water you can use, the more money we have to put into the system to make sure that we can produce that water. So about 80% of our meters are 3/4 inch meters. So that's the most impacted. So what you'll see the most people base bill with, and this bill includes everything: water, sewer, trash. It assumes you donate to the park, the TUF, and the vector control. So your water bill for 3,000 gallons, which is probably about 60% of total water users fall within that, or it will be $89.80, going from $89.80 to $92.10. So that 2.5% increase over the last 5 years, we've increased water bills less than 5%. Have you seen what your electric bill has done in that same time period? Or your gas bill? Or your cable TV bill? So we are mindful and trying not to, impact residents more than we have to, but some of that, like solid waste, that cost is passed on to us. We don't have a choice but to pass that on to the customer, and we do want to continue to make sure that we're adequately funding water and sewer systems to make sure that we don't have problems. I will kind of remind you, we talk about that a lot, most of our leaks, this year we've had 35 water leaks that have been on main lines and 240 that have been service lines, so it's vast majority on the service line system. But how many times have you seen us have to put out a boil water notice? How many times have you seen a boil water notice on TV for other communities in the Panhandle? So we do still have a superior water system. It is in good shape, and we do continue to invest in that, and we will continue to do so. So that's always the balancing act, but a 2.5% increase this year. Last year, it was a decrease, actually. So that offsets, and last year's cost of living increase was 9%, so we are, I think, still doing a pretty good job as we work to control rates. So if you look at the revenue and how everything breaks down overall, property tax is planning, that entire category is going up 2.1%, but that's because we've been under budgeting delinquent collections. So we've always gotten more out of past due collections. So while our current property tax is at the no new revenue, and showing, no new increase, we are planning an increase in the penalties and interest and delinquent to more in line with what the history has been done. So like if you look, this year we budgeted $2.7 million in property tax, and we're on track to collect just a little under 2.9. And most of that is in the delinquent taxes and penalty interest. So, if you don't pay, we never know how many back years you're gonna get in that given year. So that's, when it comes to property tax, that's kind of what's always up in the question. We know what our levy is going to be. What we don't know is how much is going to be collected this year how much is going to be collected in past years, and how much is going to be taken and gone to auction for failing to pay taxes. So that's why that's going up just a little bit. If you'll notice, the difference between the 2024 and the 2025 budget is a total of like $60,000, so it's that very small percent. Sales tax, we are budgeting a 3.7 increase over what we budgeted last year. However, we are budgeting less than what we're planning on bringing in this year. So we're still trying to be conservative with that and make sure that we don't undershoot it. We budgeted $4.1 million in sales tax in 2024. We're on track to make $4.3 million this year. We're going to budget 4.2 next year. So we still got a little bit of flexibility in that. I know there's some uncertainty with the economy going into next year, so we definitely didn't want to be completely over optimistic on that line item. Gross receipts tax, you'll see, is going down just a little bit. That's mainly due to our continued decrease in cable TV franchise as people move to the internet and streaming services over cable TV. License and permits is going down 3%. That's just some planned reductions in some of those line items of mechanical permits, things like that. Fines and forfeitures, you'll see that's going up by 26.4%. There again, remember, most of that is getting paid back to the state. Industrial district contracts is the 4.1%, so that's going up based on our negotiated contracts and will continue to go up each year through the term of those agreements. And then our service charge total is going up 6.3 for a total increase in the general fund of 4.4. So when you look at that and where our revenue comes from, right now in the general fund, property tax is 13.7% of our revenue. Property tax does not cover fire service. It does not cover police service. It covers 13.7% of general fund operations. Sales tax covers 20%, industrial districts 24%, and then service charges, that's EMS service, solid waste service, all those charges for that are paid by people that are using the service make up 35%. So we have a very diverse revenue stream. That's one of the benefits of the city of Borger, is we can, kind of spread that around. A lot of cities are very heavily sales tax or very heavily property tax. And so we do get to spread that around a little bit. So we do have a lot of different incomes. Those fines and forfeitures that we talked about, 1%. So, and this is normally one of my leadership Borger kind of soapbox, but if we need a new police car, the solution is not writing more tickets.
Exactly.
I would have to give everybody in the city of Borger probably 3 tickets before we generated enough money to buy one new police car. And like I keep reminding the council and people in public, my goal right now is to try not to get myself hung from the new street lights on 10th Street. And I'm pretty sure if we did that, this council would be pulling the rope. So anyway, we do have a pretty diverse stream there. So when we look at water and sewer and kind of go through some of that, mostly it's flat this year, down 1.2%. So you'll see that water sales, to Nutrien, we're budgeting flat, same thing to Phillips Petroleum. A little bit of increase at the carbon black plants. They're using just a little bit more as their scrubbers come online. A little bit more in Cella City assets based on what equipment is planned for replacement. Really not a whole lot of changes in the water sewer fund. It's pretty much, we've now corrected a lot of the budgeting to where we're budgeting right where we are, and the rates aren't changing enough to mess with the revenue side. So overall, when we look at the citywide as a whole, the government-wide, overall, we're budgeting $40,690,000 this year. Overall is a 3.3% increase. So this is when you look at all funds. So, the city has a significant amount of different funds as we spread that. So you've got, tourism fund, parks, recreation, opioid grant, all these different funds. So overall, just a little 3.3% increase. And a lot of that is carryover from capital construction projects that we'll talk about in just a little bit. So government-wide, when you look at where the revenues come from, 50% of our operations are general fund. That's public safety, that's public works, parks and recreation. Enterprise fund, water, which is water sewer, is 33%. Capital improvement funds is 7%. Economic development, 3.8%. Special revenue, 2.4%. And then our debt service is at 2.2%. So I think that's when we talk about debt and look at debt summary, we're still in a pretty good position. The amount we pay for debt service is 2.2% of our overall revenue. So that's a pretty small amount. Probably, I would be willing to bet most people pay a higher percentage of their paycheck for their mortgage than 2%. So overall, fiscally, we're still doing pretty good. On the expenditure side, the general fund is budgeting expenditures of $20,554,000 this year. This is a decrease of 3.6%. Most of that decrease is tied to, we do not have any transfers from the general fund this year. Last year, we transferred excess fund balance to support the Johnson Park swimming pool project. We transferred about $900,000 out of the general fund to cover some of that. In the water sewer fund, our operating expenditures are up 12.7% to 16.5, but $3.4 million of that are transfers, because we are transferring some of their surplus fund balance to offset the City Hall project and the Johnson Park Youth Center project. We'll talk about their other capital projects. If you remember, 3 years ago, we moved $4 million from water sewer into the water sewer capital fund to fund their capital projects. So these transfers are not impacting water sewer capital projects as well. So both of these funds are what we call structurally budgeted, structurally balanced. The general fund is balanced, revenues and expenditures match. In the water sewer fund, revenues and expenditures less transfers match. So the reason that it shows negative is only the transfers, which are excess funds to cover capital projects, one-time capital projects, and we'll talk about fund balance here shortly. Personnel changes in this upcoming budget. So the general fund, we have reduced a court clerk position. So we moved one of the court clerks into an open position over at City Hall, and the court clerk voluntarily, Michelle and Emily both got together and said they didn't feel like that second position was needed and worked with us. So we did some changes and they gave up that and are covering that pretty well. So we appreciate their foresight and mindfulness of looking out for the taxpayers as we were going through that. We did add a dispatch position this year to alleviate OT expenses and staffing shortages. So we're back up to where we were a few years ago. We had tried to be a little efficient and do it with a few less, but we've kind of can't come back on that. We have added an EMT to the fire EMS department to support our call volume and transfers there. So that's now 11 personnel instead of 10. Of course, our revenues were looking good, so we anticipate that to cover some of it. So they've definitely been busy, and I know Jeff is probably super excited about that. He'd probably be super excited for 2 more on top of that, but we'll work at it a year at a time. And then we added a event specialist in the venue fund to help Nicole at the Dome. And I think we all know the Dome has been quite well received and quite heavily utilized, so having that extra full-time position I do think is needed, and that will be offset by the operating funds of the venue. And then we added 2 wildland firefighters with a revenue offset. Of course, we all saw the benefit of the fire mitigation program during our wildfires this year, so we are continuing to invest in that. The trade-off there is we do receive revenue on that, and so that line item's increasing from $350,000 to $550,000, which will offset the cost of the 2 additional full-time wildfire fighters. I do think we'll have a little decrease in the part-time budget, the part-time now will be very much dependent on actual fire load, and having a bigger team, the 5 full-time employees now will be able to do a lot more mitigation work without part-time people more regularly throughout the year, so that should be beneficial there. And then we added the additional SRO at the request of BISD, and of course, they're funding 75% of that. So overall, we're increasing positions by 5, but all but one of these have revenue offsets to help cover their cost. So we are very mindful of that when we look at positions. So We want to make sure that there's some sort of revenue offset or a legitimate need. So the only one that, like I said, the dispatch we're kind of adding back to where we were, and EMS will have somewhat of a revenue offset, but we all kind of knew we were feeling our way a little bit in that department. But still, even with that, we're budgeting a shortfall next year of about $300,000, which is still more than half less than what the stipend to AMR would have been. So we're still looking pretty well with that. There are no personnel changes in the water sewer fund. And then on our compensation program, so this year, we're proposing a 5% increase for all except non-sworn, for all non, it's kind of worded how this is, everybody except hourly public safety. So all the executives, all public works, all regular employees, 5%. Hourly sworn public safety is 7%. So that's police, fire, and EMS that are sworn, meaning they have a state certification and provide field services. So that a lot was driven some by the Senate bill passed that provided funding to the rural counties, trying to get our salary up in line with what some of the counties. For a police officer, this will take our starting salary just slightly above $50,000. To put that in comparison, what the commissioners just approved is a pay grade somewhere over 70 for deputies. Now, they don't have paid overtime, and they don't have steps like we do. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds, but a lot of that is what's driving our need to kind of stay competitive on the public safety side. We also had a 0.63% in our TMRS contribution rate, but we have no change in health insurance. When we bid that out last year, we signed a 2-year contract, so we are not not increasing that. So this year's health insurance budget is $513,000 less than what we budgeted last year. So that's how we're funding a significant portion of these raises. So pretty much we're taking money that we had budgeted for health insurance, we got a better deal, moved everybody over, and are now investing it back into those same employees in higher salary. So that's where a lot of that is coming. And that $513,000 savings is including 5 new positions. So we did quite well last year on our health. Now, how long that'll stay up, we'll find out when we come to renew in fiscal '26, but for now, we're looking pretty good with that. So like I said, overall, that takes our full-time positions up by 5 from 183 to 188. So on the general fund expenditure summary side, so you can see that the non-departmental, which are the transfers, are down 100% because we have budgeted none. This year, we budgeted 1.7 last year. General administration is going up only 2%, so that's, plan development, city secretary, city manager. So we're taking the least of the increase. Public safety is taking the most at 8.2% with a 7% salary increase. Culture and recreation down just 0.8%, and public works down 1.4%. Some of that on public works is moving, is a decrease in our solid waste costs. So as we increase some of that, we've actually had a decrease in solid waste collection amounts, which also decrease our cost. It doesn't decrease the amount of money we need per account, but overall it increases. So when we talk about the solid waste rate going up, it went up, but I have not budgeted an increase in revenue. Because we have, as we try to address housing and some of that stuff, we have less users than we have in the past. So that doesn't change the need to impact that rate. Our revenue's not going up and our costs are kind of in line. Questions on general fund? When you look at that, 61.8% of our general fund budget is going to public safety. So that's been a council priority and a community priority. I would say we're doing pretty well in how much we're investing in that. Public works is another 19%, general administration 9.9%, and culture and recreation 9.2%. On the water and sewer side, you'll see, of course, the biggest increase is the transfers, because we had just a little transfer last year, and we're having a much bigger transfer this year. Again, we're about to get to fund balances where we'll show where that's coming from and what that's doing. So the biggest changes, you'll notice a big decrease in utility billing and a big increase in utility administration. That's because we reclassified where split positions were going. So 50% of council expenses, 50% of my expenses and Brandon's and Stella's and HR's were coded to utility billing. We're moving that next year into utility administration. We feel that is a better representation of where that money should be spent. Utility administration previously had only been Chris and Mark, just a director and assistant director. So now they've got our shared expense, which is part of the administrative cost of running the utilities. So other than that, things are pretty much close to the same. Overall, it's that 12% increase, which is driven by that transfer. So when we look at government-wide expenditures, we're looking at total expenditures of $50,018,322. That's a 2.8% increase over last year. So overall, pretty close to the same. Expenditures by fund, when we look at this on the government-wide, so very much like revenue, our expenditures, of course, are spent pretty much in line with where the revenue comes from. General fund at 50%, enterprise fund at 33%. When we look at government-wide expenses, so in all of the money we spend, public safety is 28.9%, water and sewer 26.9%, capital construction 19.3%, public works 8%, general administration 4%, and culture and recreation 4%. These are our budgeted amounts, what we've been budgeting. So it's kind of hard to see because the grays are the same. But in 2021, we budgeted more revenue than expenditures, and we came in higher on revenue and under in expenditures. In 2022, we budgeted more expenditures because we had started capital projects and thought we were going to spend some of that. But we came in under revenue because some of those projects were delayed coming out of COVID. But we also generated more revenue than we had anticipated. In 2023, the same thing, we budgeted more expenditures than revenue as we were spending down debt issuances and fund balance. It's kind of hard to see, but we ended more even. And then, of course, this year we budgeted more, still working on spending those down, but we haven't spent all of it. So some of that is continuing over into next year. And so as we start going through the next slide, you'll see what I'm talking about. So these are our fund balance history. So this is general fund. So you will see this is cash in the bank, right? So we've built cash in the bank up. And so as we have increased that, we've got more money available to fund one-time capital expenditures without taking out debt. On the same side of that, we've done very much the same thing on the water sewer side. So you see that big drop in 2022, that's when we moved $3 million, the $4 million into the capital construction fund for the water wells that we're still working on and still spending down. But this chart is what really kind of shows that. So we started this year with $22.8 million in the bank. We planned on spending $10 million more than revenue, spending down that fund balance, which still would have left us with $12.2 million in the bank. We're projecting to start this year at $19 million in the bank because we still haven't spent all those projects where we haven't done the wells yet. We finally have found water for the wells, but we didn't spend. So that's $4 million that we'd originally planned to spend that we haven't, and so all that's carrying over. So even with what we're planning, starting the budget at $19.7 million, and then spending on the capital, which would leave us a negative $9 million, still leaves us $10.7 million in the bank. The city's reserve requirement that the council increased 2 years ago from 25% to 28%, it's $5.1 million in the general fund and $3.4 million in the water sewer fund. So we increased revenue, so we're gonna, if we spend every dollar budgeted in the general fund, we will end $284,000 below the 28% reserve requirement, which would equate to 27.5%. Now, some of that is because we transferred $1.7 million last year to help cover the swimming pool project. So while we're going under a little bit, that prevented us from having to issue long-term
Yes.
debt. So I do think that we will end the budget year at our level, because that number is assuming we spend every dime we budgeted. And we haven't done that in my last 5 years. And that's even including this year with the unforeseen expenses of wildfire. So I think we'll end up the year good. And of course, the water sewer fund will finish where it's at. So that's still leaving us above our 28% reserve requirement and getting some pretty big capital projects done.
Yeah.
So I do want to do a little bit of demographic review real quick. So you'll see that our population is continuing to decline just a little bit. It's slowed down a little bit, but this is why this council and this administration have been focused on housing so intently.
Yeah.
Because if we don't get that up and start spreading these costs amongst more people, we're going to continue to have long-term problems. So I do hope in the next year or two to be able to say or show a little uptick in that as we get Yucca Estates completed and keep working through some of these.
Yes.
But our growth was down 0.8% versus 2021, this is the newest version of the community survey that's available. So our growth is the 743 out of 1,222 municipalities in the Texas. So we're worse than half, but there's still a lot worse than us.
Yeah.
So I think we've got some good things coming that will help that. When you look at where our population is distributed, age group wise, we're pretty well distributed. Our greatest group is still 25 to 54. So we're not maybe quite as old as some people might like to think we are. And this is kind of the thing we talk about some. So our family, we're pretty much close to the state average on our family households versus married couples. We're 40% higher than the state average for seniors living alone. And I think sometimes that's where we get that belief that maybe we're an older community. I don't think we're necessarily older. We just have more seniors that have chosen to stay here than some that have moved elsewhere. And we're a little higher, 28% of our households are just single. So that's 10% higher than the state average. We talk about this a lot when you look at our housing. So we have more people own here than rent, which I think can be a positive thing, especially as we start investing more in housing.
Yeah.
You can see that our median household income has gone up quite a bit in the last 2 years to $88,100. And our median household income is $54,159. Overall, when you look at revenues and expenses compared to other similar sized cities, our revenues are $22.3 million, which is about 10% higher than similar towns. A lot of that is because of our industrial districts and our industrial, because if you remember, our taxes is only 13%, property tax only 13%. But, so a lot of that isn't burdened on property tax or revenue. So that I think is a positive thing. Our expenses are at $20.8 million, which are only about 4% higher than similar cities. So that I think kind of indicates that we're being somewhat efficient with our use of cost. So our sales tax is 42% higher than most average cities. That's thankful to our industrial base and turnarounds and something like that. Property tax revenue is about 9% higher, which means our appraised values are probably slightly higher than other cities. Law enforcement, our 3.8 is 53% higher than similar sized cities. Fire, 63%. Parks and recreation, 23% higher. So we do invest in these services that sometimes people think we don't. So I'd just like to put some of that out there as we compare ourselves to other communities. So as we talk about capital projects, in the general fund, we have quite a bit of capital equipment. I'm not going to read this list. It is online. It's in the presentation. What I do want to point out is that as we've invested more in regular replacement of equipment, we still continue to be able to budget about 20% less in maintenance for our vehicles. That 20% is saving almost $200,000 a year. So we do try to look at the long term when we make those decisions. That $200,000 is a significant amount in budgeting and budget savings.
And you get more in the auction.
Yeah, right. And when we talk about the CIP, we'll talk about how much we can sell and what that is. There's about $200,000 in sell city equipments in this budget to offset our cost. General fund capital construction projects, of course, we have the Johnson Park Pool project going on, and we have the City Hall project that'll start shortly. City Hall, just a reminder, the vast majority of that cost are replacing building systems that are beyond their service life, heating and air that dates back to 1984, plumbing and bathrooms that date back to 1984, front doors and all of that date back to 1984, ADA accessibility that dates back to 1984. Not to date Judy, they did a good job back when they did all of that, but it unfortunately was not yesterday.
No, that's for sure.
And so after doing the building study, you know, we have found that they did make a wise financial decision in buying a building that is secure and structurally sound, so it can meet our needs for many more years. So after doing that, we are investing a little bit to make this building a little more user-friendly for the employees that work here, that service our citizens, and for the citizens that come in and use it. On the water sewer capital side, we still have our northwest well field expansion going. You know, we have identified the location for one new water well. We're working on using some we talked about that here a while back. They can go out and do some mapping to try to find a location for that next one. We've got it narrowed down, so instead of using 6 more possible test holes, we're going to use some new technology and try to narrow that down. But we are working through that. Starting the engineering on the Bryan Street wastewater improvements, that's running along 2nd Street where we're continuing our concrete and kind of sewer issues. The Rock Creek wastewater improvements, that'll continue. That's what we're doing right now. That's the above grade crossing, which I know I put some of those pictures in your weekly update emails. That's kind of cool. We're building a little mini bridge. I've never watched anybody build a little mini bridge with concrete pylons. But then we do have the cost for the wastewater treatment plant lift. Number 2 is the one that's failed. We are engineering lift number 1, and we will bid that with lift number 2. We have a little bit of money in the budget, but I don't know if we've got enough to cover both lifts. So that's why it's yellow, just in case. And depending on how the budget goes too, we're looking at starting a utility design for our next phase of housing development. So that we can continue with that. That's one of the things that we're doing is we're eating the cost of utility design so that the utilities on those new subdivisions can meet our standards and come in easier. And then that does save, but that does serve as an incentive for the developers on that land. We do have a lot of tough chip seal projects next year. With 10th Street coming to an end, that frees up a little bit of money. So you're going to see a significant amount of chip seal coming, mostly in Buena Vista. Next year, we've hit our high traffic streets now. The one that's not on there that we're going to add next year, the next high traffic, is we will go ahead and chip seal Roosevelt from Cedar to Wilson. That's the newest street per se in town, and we want to make sure that we get a good coat on it before it degrades any further, so they'll be on there. We do have funding back in for our curb and gutter sidewalk projects next year. I will remind everybody, the sidewalk projects down Wilson and down Cedar is not a city project. We are not spending $6 million on sidewalks all over town for that project at the expense of not doing other things. You know, I think they're good in some place, but we do have a master sidewalk plan of ourselves to connect schools and parks. We started that up by North Hughes and have done some areas there. So we will continue working on that next year and put in probably a sidewalk around Buena Vista Park as well. And then we should have the 10th Street project completed by the end of this calendar year, 1st of next year. So that's progressing quite along. Maybe not as quick as some people would want, but in a city that was built in the boom era of the 20s with engineers working on pencil and slide rules, you know, there are just unforeseen things that
Yeah, for sure.
that come up. Questions on the budget?
I've got one question concerning the slide that you had on the number of people in town. I think there's like a $1,300 difference between those that are those transitory work here and then go home. I mean, go to Amarillo is
Right.
So we can get some of that back then.
Right. So The total population is 12,505. Let me try to get it back
Is
on
the
the screen.
daytime.
Yeah. But I was just thinking, to get the housing here, we get
Yeah. something.
maybe 1,000 people start moving back in here. Since they're taking their money elsewhere.
Wow.
Anyway, that was the slide I was talking about.
Yeah, I just, like technology doesn't always work this slide. Because the daytime population is 13,300, so our total population is 12,500. So we add about 1,000 people in the day from those transient workers coming in. And so those are definitely, that's just the workers. If we
Right.
get the worker to live here, they bring the family.
Right.
Yeah.
So that 1,000 workers could be worth 3,000 or 4,000 people.
Yeah.
Which spend money here.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
brings taxes up. which
Right.
brings houses up.
And since we've got a half-cent sales tax for property tax
Yeah.
reduction, that drives the property tax rate down, which is why we've done some of that as well.
If there's nothing, then I'll open we'll conduct a public hearing. We'll open that. If anyone has anything they'd like to say or ask, and if not, then we will close the public hearing. And I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve on final reading ordinance
I have another one.
O-006-24 adopting the fiscal year 2025 operating budget.
Second.
All in favor? Yay. It passes. And it's nice to have it over with. It's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work for y'all, but it's still a lot of work for us too. And then item 11, consider and take appropriate action to approve on final reading ordinance O-007-24, amending the City of Borger's fee schedule for the fiscal 2025 budget year. Mr. Spradling.
We did talk about that last time too, and we talked about it a little bit in the presentation. The only other things that are going up that weren't covered in the presentation is the dome rental rates are going up by 10%, except the nonprofit rates, those are staying the same. That's partially to cover the full-time position that we need out there. And then there are some water tap fees are going up to cover the cost of just that equipment's gone up. And then there are some other miscellaneous equipment in the fee schedule that we charge when necessary for going up. So the impact to citizens on those other changes are pretty small, but it's in the packet. If anybody's interested, they can go online, download the packet. It's pretty easy to read and all of that. And like I said, we did cover it in more detail last week, but I'll entertain any other questions that you might have.
I have none, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve on final reading ordinance O-007-24, amending the City of Borger Code of Ordinances, Chapter 1, General Provisions, Article 1.07, fee schedule.
Second.
All in favor? And it passes. Item 12, consider and take appropriate action on Resolution R-022-24, approving the fiscal year 2025 through 2029 Community Investment Program. Mr. Spradlin.
So this is kind of the last thing with our planning, our budget process. When we adopted the Boomtown 2040 Comprehensive Plan, one of the strategic action priorities was to keep a 5-year CIP. A lot of communities call these capital improvement programs. I do prefer the term community investment program because our capital improvements are an investment in our community. And so I think that that's a little more appropriate than kind of the more financial or engineering term capital improvement program. Again, this is online, www.borgertx.gov/transparency, so you can see all of our projects and what we're planning online. So when we talk about what is a CIP, it identifies, prioritizes, and supports funding for essential capital projects over 5 years and complies with our financial policies. It's a way for us to, be more transparent in both the prioritization and adoption of these projects. So when publicly developed and educated, a CIP allows, it highlights our community goals and needs, which a lot of these feedback to our engagement through the Boomtown 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This is how we fund our strategic priorities. Then we took that, and if you recall 2 years ago with the council, we did our little strategic session. Councilman Lawrence was talking about that earlier, where I gave you your one red dot and your 5 blue dots. And so we kind of work through that. It is a way to inform the public. We get all of our projects out there. And not all of them are funded. You know, these are things we want to do. Just because we want to do it doesn't mean that they're funded, and doesn't mean that they will happen. But we need to know what we want to do so that as funding becomes available, we can work through that. It increases program efficiency. What they mean by that is that if all of our departments know what all the other departments are asking for, they can kind of see it. And so they can time things better. And so that's like a good example of that is we spend about $1.4 million on light duty equipment every year. But as it gets, if you recall, we just spent $472,000 on the new sewer truck. And you just authorized $400,000 for the automatic side loader that's in this budget year. Well, if we don't have that planned out, and Chris and Jason asked for those in the same year, they've just taken up 80% of our capital budget, light duty vehicle budget. So knowing when everybody's big expenses hit allow us to kind of balance and separate things out. Of course, it identifies economically sound funding. You know, so if we know what we need, we know what we can afford and what we can't. There were things this year that got pushed because we didn't have the funding for everything that had originally been identified. But by having the next 4 years planned out, we can spread it out and make sure that we take most advantage of our funding. It also enhances the city's credit rating. So having a plan in place and making continual investments in our capital is denoted in our plan. So if you recall, when we issued the debt for the ladder truck, that was one of the things that they called out, that our financial policies improved by one level because we had adopted the 5-year CIP plan. So it is important to have these. And then, of course, they also implement our master plans. And so we've been very mindful of trying to address everything in a strategic, planned approach. We do have all these plans now, and so we want to put them to good use. And so this helps us do that. This plan, we do score all of our projects by a weighted score to help prioritize what needs or get higher priority versus lower priority. 24% of that score is the project's impact on public health and safety. So whether that be a fire substation or a police car or a park, park's not going to have much impact on public health and safety, but a police car might. Operational impact, we score it. Is this going to add to our operational cost, or is this going to make it more efficient and save us money? So we want to factor that in on these projects. Regulatory compliance, do we have to do it? Some things we don't have a choice. Quality of life is 18%. So there, while the park might have not been high on public health and safety, it is high on quality of life. That police car is probably a little lower on quality of life than the park. Infrastructure is 18%. Is this streets? Is this physical infrastructure that's going to benefit the community long term? Is it replacing something that's reached its service life, end of its service life? Or are we just trying to replace something that hasn't reached the end of its service life? Like on City Hall, the City Hall project is replacing a
Antiquated.
a 40-year-old heating and air system that has reached the end of its life. That infrastructure has a higher rating than replacing the heating and air at the Dome that we just redid 2 years ago.
Makes sense.
External funding. Are we paying for this, or is somebody else paying for this? Is there grant money available for the project? Are there public-private partnerships available for the project? So we take that into consideration. And following community feedback in the comprehensive plan, beautification. So will the project add a beautification enhancement to our community? 10th Street's an example of that, where we did add beautification elements in line with the comprehensive plan. So there's going to be some landscaping, and we are trying to take advantage of opportunities when we have a project to enhance the beautification of the community as well. So over the next 5 years, this plan has identified $63,829,011 worth of capital projects. Not all of these are funded. We'll talk about that in a minute. When you look at that breakdown by year, of course, year 2025 in the plan is funded. That is part of our operational budget. So we have $11.4 million of projects being completed in fiscal 25. Next year, that's going to go down to 6. But we should have completed 10th Street. We should have completed the Johnson Park Youth Center, and so our capital spending will be going down. In 2027, we're planning $4.9 million. In 2028, 4.4. 2029, you see a big number because that's where we put a lot of the things that are wishes that aren't funded. So that's $36.9 million, but when we get to the funding section, you'll see why a lot of those are in the far year out. Request by category, Parks and Recreation is the largest category with $14.2 million. Stormwater is next with 11.6. That's following the completion of our master drainage plan. So now we've identified all of our stormwater needs. Not all of these are going to get addressed in the next 5 years, but we have identified them so that we can properly plan. 11.5 million for municipal facilities and equipment, 9.7 for vehicles and wheeled equipment, $7 million in transportation system, that's your street work, that's your roads and your tough. 3.2 for water, 2.9 for wastewater. So we've identified things and across a lot of categories. When you look at funding source by year, so now you kind of start seeing that. The circle graph on the next slide will give you a better idea, but you can see that in 2029, a lot of that is unfunded. And so we've only put things in here that we know we can fund or the council has already given some funding authority to. So overall, we get funding from certificates of obligation, which is long-term debt. The equipment fund, there's still some money in there, so we're using the equipment fund. A lot of times now, like what we just did in the last budget amendment, the vehicles that haven't come in this year, we move the money into the equipment fund so that we make sure we've got the money for it next year. Yeah. So that's mostly what the equipment fund is doing now. It also is handling our ambulances, because we do still make payments into there, the way that our ambulance agreement is structured with Hutchinson County and the city of Fritch. General fund operating revenue, that's just our regular revenue, sale of city assets. Water sewer fund operating revenue, debt issuances other than COs. So that's like our tax anticipation note for the city hall. General fund capital fund, so that's where we move our excess reserves to fund capital projects. Hotel occupancy tax, of course, the transportation user fund, and then the water sewer capital fund where we move excess revenue from water sewer to fund those capital projects. So that's where the water wells and stuff are getting paid for. So overall, that breaks down to right now, 56.55% of these projects are unfunded, $38.5 million we have yet to identify a funding source for. And so that's why, yes, we have identified the need for a fire substation. No, it is not funded. Where is that money going to come from? Don't know yet. Will we ever know? Hopefully. Main Street realignment. Yes, it's been identified as a project. No, it has not been funded. When do I think that's going to happen? I don't know. Will there be more public engagement before we do that project? Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because they're in this plan isn't, it's a living document, it moves. But the fact that people are asking about that and know that it's out there, I think is proof that the document works. Yeah. This is about letting the community know. We do see and take input from our social media comments and from phone calls and from other people that are saying. So, I mean, that is definitely considered, when we prioritize these things. 7.7% is funded out of the general fund in the 5-year period. Water sewer fund will fund 6.3 out of that 5-year period. Grant funding is funding currently and through the 5-year period, $3.2 million. I expect that to go up. We have a couple projects. We talked about the hazard mitigation grants that are coming. I think that'll help us get the 3rd Street Drainage Project covered. And Whistler's working on that fire detection camera grant, so I think that'll go up next year. The Transportation User Fund is funding 2.1, Equipment Fund 2.1, the Tax Anticipation Note for City Hall, which is the short-term debt, 1.5, sell of city assets, so by rotating our equipment, that's funding over $1 million of our capital needs in the next 5 years. So there's definitely financial benefit to getting new and recycling more often. Capital Construction Fund is funding $797,000, and then hotel occupancy tax is funding $204,199. So there again, this is all online. You can see the details of all the individual projects that we've identified, the funding's where we think funding will come, where the cost is coming from. I would just kind of preface, like we talked with the council, this is a living document. It changes every year. The fire substation has been in year 5 of this project for 3 years straight.
Yeah.
and until something need changes or something like that, we just keep pushing it. So, like I said, just because it's in there, don't think that it's in its final form, don't think it's in its final cost. You know, the youth sports complex is in this plan. Is it funded? No. As we've talked about through a lot of things, you know, there are definitely some funding difficulties in a $14 million youth sports complex. But it is a project, it is something we are working towards, and everything identified in this, we will continue to work towards and find ways of funding it at some point.
Does anyone have anything? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Garrett.
Resolution R-022-24, approving the fiscal year 2025 through 2029 Community Investment Program.
A second.
All in favor? And it passes. Item
13?
13, consider and take appropriate action to introduce on first reading ordinance O-008-24, amending Chapter 1, General Provisions, Article 1.06, Parks and Recreation, Division 6, the Dome Civic and Convention Center, Article 4.02.007, Park Alcohol Permit, and Article 3.06, Plumbing, Section 3.06.002, amendments to the code. Mr. Spradlin.
So we talked about this in, not this work session, but the previous work session. So this is actually, the ordinance is going to codify a few more changes to the dome rules. Most of these rules have been in place. That ordinance allows the city manager to authorize additional policies as needed, with what's in the ordinance being the minimum. But there are a few changes that we've had, that we just wanted to go ahead and add into the code just to make it more transparent and a little more enforceable. So this is adding cancellation requirements and refund policies into the code. Like I said, we've been practicing those, you know, how much you get back based on how much notice, so this just codifies that. Modifies our conditions for the refusal to lease. So these have been, this was in there some, but we've added a few. We've made it easier for us to put you on the do not rent to list if you leave the facility in less than desirable conditions. So it was a little vague on that area. You know, there were definitely other reasons, so we're adding a little bit of that. We are updating and adding our security deposit requirements for the different rooms to coincide with how we've been doing, along with the refunds and the withholding procedures for that. We're adding, you cannot use a portable cooking device inside the dome or anywhere in the facility. So if you're going to bring your black stone to cook breakfast or whatever you're going to cook, it needs to be outside. Other than that, all cooking needs to be in the kitchen under the vent hood. Now, this does not, you know, if you're bringing food in a crock pot that you cooked at home, you know, we're not talking about warming devices, we're talking about cooking appliances, you know. So, silly that you have to add some of those things, but you do. In the park alcohol permit, we're adding that events celebrating a minor has to use a licensed third-party vendor for alcohol service, i.e. no BYOB if the event is supporting a minor. And so this is our way of trying to crack down a little bit on underage drinking or excess drinking at birthday parties, quinceañeras, things like that, when the primary, when you're celebrating a minor, you have a lot more minors present at the event. So that's kind of our way, without being discriminatory, to, you know, tighten that. So you can still have alcohol, but it's not like, you're gonna have to have a vendor that's charging you per drink or a cash bar. So no just open cooler at the back, which you weren't supposed to have anyway. You're supposed to have licensed servers, but there's a big difference between the licensed servers and then the event organizer getting charged per drink that gets served. So it's a lot more when you're using that third party, so we think that that will tighten it down just a little bit. And then the last change on the plumbing code is just kind of a little minor thing. It's kind of weird to add it in here, but it's so minor I didn't want to do a standalone ordinance for it. During our inspection at the wastewater treatment plant, one of the things we got dinged on by the TCEQ was enforcement policy for backflow prevention devices. So the code and the TCEQ does require backflow prevention devices. We have required that. But our code does not say we can specifically terminate service if you are out of compliance. So this adds the wording to say, if you're out of compliance, we can terminate service. So we already had the enforcement provisions where we could write you a ticket for every day you were out of compliance, and we could take you to court, but it did not specifically say that we could terminate service. So this corrects that little section of the code to meet TCEQ requirements. Questions?
Can you explain that last thing? What is that?
So like sprinkler systems,
It's like a check valve.
it's, what the code is worried about is that in certain circumstances, if you don't have that backflow prevention, and say your sprinkler system is full of dirty, muddy water, and for some reason the system has a vacuum on it, or loses pressure, it can suck the dirty, muddy, bacterially infested water
I see.
into the public water system. If that happens, then the public water system is now no longer safe. So that backflow prevention device prevents that from happening. And so all new construction and all sprinkler systems have to have that so that you don't contaminate. So the goal is to ensure proper protection of the, so that, and that's why the TCQ wants that. So if you refuse to comply, we just disconnect you from the public water system. And then your out of compliance house is not jeopardizing
So
the
it's
rest of
only
the
on
system.
Sprinkler system.
That's where it's most common. Newer code requires you to have those devices on your hose bibs, so that if you leave your hose screwed in and it's sitting in a puddle of water, and for some reason the vacuum is pulled on a system and it sucks from your, they're very,
Or in a swimming pool. Sucks it back.
in our system, it's very uncommon, but like out in TCY systems sometimes, like we've talked a little bit about that with their fire suppression system. It is not uncommon for Mike's fire truck to pull a vacuum on a hydrant that has less than ideal water flow. And when that happens, you know, I've heard complaints of people out there that it sucked the water out of their toilets. It's very rare and uncommon, but you know, the public water system, having that pressure is what ensures that it's safe. That's why the state has minimum pressure requirements, because bacteria can't get in unless it's low pressure. So that's why, when you have boil water notices, generally it's because the pressure has gone down below that threshold to where bacteria could get into the line. Not saying it will or it does, but it could. And so you've got that same problem with sprinkler systems and backflow prevention, which is why they want that language in there. Like I said, our code does require that, and we've been enforcing that code. We just didn't have
The right wording.
the right wording.
And so you also don't have a crappily maintained water system? No?
Crap is in the wastewater system, not the water system.
Let's move on.
Anybody?
Other questions?
If not, then entertain a motion.
I move to introduce on first reading ordinance 0-008-24, amending chapter 1, general provision, article 1-06, park and recreation, division 6, the Dome Civic and Convention Center, article 4-02-007, park alcohol permit, and article 3.06, plumbing, section 3.06.002, amendments to the code.
Second. All in favor?
That's witness, we can't read it now.
And it passes. And item 14, consider and take appropriate action on a multiple use agreement between the City of Borger and the Texas Department of Transportation for the construction, use, and installation of the flock traffic cameras located within state right-of-ways. Chief Davis.
This is Mayor, council members, good evening. I'm coming to you tonight to ask permission to enter into a multiple use agreement between the city and TxDOT for use of the state right-of-way. What this is for flock traffic cameras. Now, this is a Panhandle-wide project that has been headed by the Panhandle Auto Theft Task Force, and we requested to be a part of the grant with several other entities inside the Panhandle Law Enforcement, County, and municipal agencies. Now, what this does is allows traffic cameras to be placed certain places around town. Now, what this is not is red light cameras. It's not a speeding ticket camera. It does not take any kind of enforcement action. The purpose of these cameras is for investigatory. Okay, for example, let's say that we have an Amber Alert. An Amber Alert comes out and it gives a vehicle description as well as a license plate number. Then that information can be entered into the system, and basically what the cameras are license plate readers, and they read the license plates of the vehicles as they go by. And if, let's say, our suspect vehicle from the Amber Alert passes by one of our cameras, it sends us an alert and says this vehicle was right here at this location going this direction at this time. So it's not necessarily for traffic enforcement or any other, that aspect like the cameras that you've heard of in the past, like red light cameras and such, but it's actually for locating and investigating suspects in major crimes. The grant that the Panhandle Auto Theft Task Force applied for initially was for Cadillac converter thefts to help combat them, as well as vehicle thefts. So let's say that someone's vehicle is stolen here in Borger. We enter that information into the system, and then they go to Perryton, and that stolen vehicle passes one of Perryton or Ochiltree County's flock cameras, then it sends them an alert that, hey, this vehicle is reported stolen out of Borger, and it just passed by this camera at this location. With the anticipation of hopefully receiving the grant, we did enter the money. We did put in for the money in our fiscal year 25 budget in hopes of receiving the grant, which we did. Right now, throughout the Panhandle, with the help of this grant, there's going to be about over 150 of these cameras put up throughout the Panhandle. So it will be a very useful resource for us as far as investigations and trying to curb some of these thefts and other things. There's other benefits besides vehicle thefts, like I said, on the like a stolen vehicle, an Amber Alert, an attempt to locate, even if we have a suspect in a crime. Recently, we had a vehicle come from Pampa over here, committed another crime here in Borger, were dealt with by our officers, and then later on it was determined that they were involved in a homicide in Pampa. Had we had the flock system, that vehicle had been entered in the flock system, we would have already known that they were coming into Borger, as opposed to us finding out way later, which obviously could have worse consequences. So the benefit to us as far as an agency for an investigatory tool, I think, is very good. Like I said, we have been approved for the grant, but what I need is approval from y'all to be able to enter into an agreement with TxDOT to have them placed on TxDOT right away throughout the city, which would be a total of 5 cameras for us, which would be one at each city limits and then Roosevelt and Wilson. But I'm happy to entertain any questions or provide any other information.
And our we have a contribution, a financial contribution as well, right, that we.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So what the financial contribution for the police department for our part is $3,900 a year, which is a small fraction compared to what the actual cost is. But that is basically our contribution to the grant. The grant covers the majority of
It's
the
pretty much
cost.
the software maintenance.
Yeah, pretty much. It's actually very minimal. This is something that, you know, some agencies, especially the bigger agencies like DPS, have the same type of license plate readers on their vehicles that do the same thing as they drive. That's something that I would love for us to have. However, the financial cost of that is just not something that I can justify. But with this grant, it helps us because it's a very minimal cost to the city, but we still get the benefit of having the license plate readers.
And there's 5.
Yes, ma'am.
And they'll be like coming into town, kind of, is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am. So what it does is it depends on the location, how we have it set
Oh,
up,
okay.
but we're going to have one placed at each of our major roadways, all 4 directions out of the city, and then Roosevelt and Wilson, because that's a high traveled area there.
The thinking is if you get all the ways in and out, that if a
Yeah.
car triggers one of them but doesn't go across another one,
They're in town.
Kinda-
there's a high likelihood that they're still in town
Yeah,
somewhere.
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
our criminals here go to Pampa, go to Amarillo, Amarillo's criminals come here and all over, so it helps throughout the Panhandle. It's a useful
Yeah.
tool because we can kind of, you know, if we have somebody we're looking for and they end up in Dalhart, then we have the ability to know that they're there.
And they'll be doing all the update and maintenance on these cameras.
Yes, yeah, part of the cost is through the company, which is Flock is the name of the company, and they take care of all that for us. That's part of what we pay them for every year.
There will be a bigger question at some point in the future when these cameras reach the end of their service life. whether you replace them or if there's more grant funding.
And I think with the Panhandle Auto Theft Group, what their intention is to continue to reapply for it, hopefully have other entities join in and add more. And then eventually, when we get to the end of life on some of these, then we could probably look towards grant funding to be able to help replace them and continue the
Well,
program.
how fast will the installation be if we approve this?
Hopefully pretty quick. I know that they are pretty much ready to actually begin the installation.
Just
What they're
we-
doing right now is just trying to get legal
Get
things
to go
such as
ahead.
this out of the way. So I would like to say within the next 6 to 8 months, hopefully.
And this is likely a project in the future that if it's not renewed, we very well could have some significantly better data to indicate whether or not it's worthwhile for us to invest.
Yeah, right.
That's been, even in my time in the police department, that's always been the big question with ALR, automatic license recognition, is there a benefit? And up until now, we've mostly been looking at like mobile, because they normally have been sold as like your auto theft guy. You put it on that car and then he drives up and down the parking lots because it will read every license plate in the parking lot. When you find one that's stolen, it dings it, and so you know it. And, in Dallas, maybe even in Amarillo, maybe that's worthwhile enough. Here it's been a little different. Having them in fixed places where you're kind of getting logs and can set things that,
I like the use of it for Amber Alerts, for sure.
or silver alerts, or
Yeah.
fatal hit and runs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both two things. If we have a suspect vehicle we're looking for, we can put it in the system. And then if that vehicle passes any of the cameras in the Panhandle or throughout the state for that matter, because they're everywhere, then it would send us an alert and say, hey, this vehicle was at this location at this time.
Right. On the alerts, does it alert all the cars? I mean, all the police officers, or just you,
The
your
way I think
office?
that it's
or-
going to be set up is through our CAD system. So it will alert an officer logged in that,
Okay.
hey, you have a flock alert
Okay.
here for this vehicle. And it may be a vehicle that's stolen somewhere else in the state that's just passing through, but it alerts our officers that the vehicle's in town or that it passed that camera at that point in time.
Okay.
Is there a lot of, is this a new kind of, a new grant, or is it a lot of cities have already done the
So
grant?
there's several cities throughout the state
The
that have
Panhandle.
invested in these. This is kind of new to the Panhandle.
Oh, okay.
Like I said before, the cost is quite a bit, but with the work of the Panhandle Auto Theft Task Force, which they're based out of Amarillo, but they assist us anytime we have stolen vehicles, need to identify a stolen trailer or other thing. They know where all the hidden VINs are and other things like that. That's their area of expertise. And they identified this as a possibility to help with stolen vehicles. And like I said, it was driven by the Cadillac converter thefts and the issues we have with those is kind of what started this. But there's a multitude of uses besides that, which is why I think it's beneficial for us.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
And if there's no other questions, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the multiple use agreement between the City of Borger and the Texas Department of Transportation for the construction, use, and installation of the flock traffic cameras located within state right-of-way, and authorize the city manager to execute all documents necessary to effectuate the same.
A second.
All in favor? And it passes. And item 15, consider and take appropriate action to approve the memorandum of agreement between the Panhandle RAC, a Department of State Health Services designated lead regional advisory council, and the City of Borger related to the Emergency Medical Task Force. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, thank y'all for letting me talk
I
today.
I cannot get your last name, I'm so sorry.
Steve. No, you're wrong.
Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
He probably prefers Jeff anyway.
That
I'm
works.
always afraid I'm going to pronounce it so wrong.
So this agreement that we're looking to enter into is between the Emergency Medical Task Force, it's through the RAC, and it operates a lot like a TIFMAS does. So a lot of the things you'll see will operate exactly the same. The 214s, the way that we're reimbursed. But the difference is it's for EMS specifically, so we can get deployed in areas or times when necessarily TIFMAS might not go. But we also could deploy with TIFMAS. It's reimbursed to the city exactly the same way. Some people that don't have fire certifications, they'll get the opportunity to deploy. And it'll get Borger's name out there. We'll be able to help the state anytime there's a disaster or any need that they have.
Okay.
Like it.
That's kind of cool. So it's pretty much the same as what our fire department does.
It's very similar to TIFMAS.
Okay.
It's, if you're familiar with TIFMAS, it works exactly the same.
Yeah,
The big thing for us is they pay for the personnel while they're gone, and they also pay for the personnel that are working overtime to backfill
Okay.
for the person that's gone. So personnel-wise, there's no impact to us when the people go. The big impact is for the employee who's getting to earn extra overtime or extra money while they're on deployment.
right.
Yes,
So
it is
that
a
can
good
be,
retention tool.
that can be a big benefit for some employees that might need or looking for ways to make more money.
Yeah.
Then where we get the benefit is they pay us an hourly rate for the ambulance. So for every hour that it's gone, we get an hourly rate to compensate us for the depreciation, wear and tear on the truck, but that gives us money to offset the replacement cost eventually of some ambulance in the future.
And how does that work out as far as keeping our ambulances in the area?
So with the truck that's on order, our plan is to keep 4 in the fleet. So this would only ever go out when all 4 are in service, which would leave 3 in the
In
community.
service, I mean, here. Okay.
Yes, I would never send
I
a truck on
was
deployment.
just
if
curious
we-
about how all that was going to work out.
Yes.
Because I knew we had an obligation to keep.
Yeah, no, we've talked about that, because that gives us, so at any one point, we will never have less than 2 in-service trucks and a maintenance spare, or emergency, or whatever you want to use that one for. So with the 4th one, we plan to, for better or for worse, Jeff rolls his eyes every time he has to say that his used ambulance has been the best ambulance.
It's very reliable.
But, when we get the 4th, we don't plan on getting rid of an ambulance.
Right.
I think that's kind of always been our little plan, to kind of get to 4, to keep the maintenance spare at the fire station, but then it's also available there. If a bigger event happens, since the firemen are EMTs, they can grab that transport or something like that. So just like we do with the fire department, it wouldn't impact what
Right.
our
They're still
basic.
covered here.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
that's
will
the main
all be
thing.
licensed, and we can always turn down a deployment as well. If we have people out or something, we didn't have the personnel, we don't have to run short. So,
And normally what they do is they call around and ask, we're trying to staff this, that we're looking for a 2-week deployment, these are the dates, do you have a crew, can you?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
I've got no problem sending you away. As long as it's
Sounds good.
beneficial.
Absolutely. Well, I won't be going personally, but
I just meant
Yeah.
figuratively.
Well, and the nice thing being kind of as we get dual certified too, so like even some of the firemen that maybe don't want to do the TIFMAS side of it, they could staff the ambulance too. They could go on the EMS side, because there are,
Yeah.
maybe they don't want to go fight the wildfire for
Yeah,
24 days straight, but they don't
I
mind
wouldn't
sitting
want
on
to
the
either.
ambulance waiting for, a boo-boo.
Yeah, I would rather go on the ambulance than fight fire, for sure.
Not much for boo-boos, so.
Not me.
It is flexible in a way for us to generate a little more revenue
Yeah,
off of the ambulances and the equipment that we invest in to try to,
Yeah.
reduce our cost. I mean, there again, those TIFMAS deployments are practically covering the cost for our hazard mitigation program, which,
Yeah.
Plus, it gets our name out there. too.
protected the entire south side of the city.
absolutely.
Very good. Yeah. And if we can help in an emergency, that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We had several of those ambulances up here during the fire.
Yeah.
And
I
they do
remember seeing
everything
some
from
of
like the Uvalde deal to hurricanes.
Yeah.
So a small 12-hour incident, 10-hour incident that
Yeah.
just needs a lot of trucks to several weeks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, the way that you can't really get employees, I'm just saying, it's rough to get employees nowadays, so I can see where they would need to
Oh, yeah.
bring other people in at things like that.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone have anything? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
I move to approve the memorandum of agreement between the Panhandle RAC, Department of State Health Services, a designated lead regional advisory council in the city of Borger, related to the Emergency Medical Task Force, and authorize the city manager to execute the necessary documents to effectuate the same.
Second.
All in favor? And it passes. And item 16, consider and take appropriate action to cast a vote for the TML Intergovernmental Risk Pool Board of Trustees in place 11 through 14. Mr. Spratlin.
So as the council's probably well, or TML IRP, Intergovernmental Risk Pool, is our insurance carrier. So, we are technically self-insured through the pool that's managed by a board. So they rotate in 3-year terms, kind of going through it this year. Place 11 through 14 are open. We're up for reelection. Staff would recommend all the incumbents. I know all of the incumbents. I think they're good. You probably don't know him, but the name you would recognize is Randy Criswell. He was the previous city manager in Canyon. He's now down in Wolfforth after being down in Mineral Wells. But, TML provides, I think, pretty good service, and I think most other people are jealous of our insurance rates based on what you have to get out on the private market if you're not in kind of a pool like that, so. Stella's gotten really comfortable with them this year, unfortunately, but. But I'll entertain any other questions. You are free to vote for whoever you would like, however, the recommended motion for the incumbents is included there.
If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to cast the City of Borger's votes in the TML IRP Board of Trustees election to Randy Criswell in place 11, Allison Hayward in place 12, and Jarlin Jefferson in place 13, and Mike Land in place 14.
Second.
All in favor? And it's passed. And item 17, consider and take appropriate action to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Oh, yeah.
And we adjourn. Thank you all for coming.
Yes.